Roger Corman, you've made over 200 films. You've been reviled as a peddler of exploitative trash. You've been hailed and admired as a witty satirist. You've given an awful lot of people an awful lot of pleasure. What are the trademarks of a Roger Corman film?
I don't know if there's any conscious trademark, but there's certain ingredients, certain elements I try to work with. First, I try to make a film that will be interesting to me. I feel if it's interesting to me, maybe it'll be interesting to somebody else. Next, I look for energy. I'm willing to do almost anything in a film except bore the audience.
Do you find your subjects in books or in life or in scripts or what?
I find my subjects everywhere. Sometimes they'll come from a book, sometimes they'll come from life. For instance, the Poe series, the Edgar Allan Poe films, all came from the works of Edgar Allan Poe. When I did films like The Wild Angels and The Trip, they came out of the headlines. I read about things in the newspapers. Other things come from ideas within me. Occasionally I will buy a screenplay, but most of the projects I will create from an idea I get from somewhere.
Action, humor, sex, a touch of social comment sometimes. What's the most important of those ingredients?
They're all important. I don't know if I would pick one over the other. Probably.
Is the sex more important than the social comment?
Well, let me come at that a little bit indirectly. All of those are important, but when you mention the social comment, I try to work on two levels. On the surface, I will do a film that is advertised as an entertainment, and I hope will be an entertainment. The audience will come, they will see the film, they will enjoy it. On a beneath the surface or subtextual level, there will be some comment that is meaningful to me. Maybe it'll be meaningful to the audience, maybe they won't even notice it, but I try to give the audience that added bonus. If they come to see a comedy, it'll be a comedy, but it'll have some thought behind it. If it's a horror film, there may well be some thought behind it as well.
What audience do you aim at? Have you a particular audience in mind? Have you had a particular audience in mind for many of your movies?
The audience for me is changing a little bit. In the past, I was appealing primarily to a young audience, say 15 to 30, something like that. Today, I'm making my films for a slightly older audience. It may be that I'm getting slightly older, but I think the audience, the demographics in the United States and in most of Europe as well, the average age is increasing. We find that our films are playing, how should I say it, only a portion of their playing time is now given over to theaters. Video cassettes, pay TV, free television take a large proportion of the playing time of the film, and the audience there is older than the theater audience, so we make our films accordingly.
Okay, but what does that accordingly mean? What's the difference between making a film for a young audience and for an older audience?
It may be that the thoughts, the concepts within the films are a little bit different. My current film, Frankenstein Unbound, has an older leading man, John Hurt, than, say, when I did The Wild Angels with Peter Fonda and Bruce Dern, or The Trip with Peter and Dennis Hopper. For instance, in The Wild Angels, my leading man was Peter Fonda. In Frankenstein Unbound, my leading lady is Bridget Fonda, Peter's daughter, so we move with the generations here.
But I mean, when you talk about making movies for a young audience, a lot of that young audience had assembled with partners of, I suppose, mostly the opposite sex, but perhaps also of the same sex, in a motor car at a drive-in with a bag of popcorn and a can of goodness knows what to watch the movie. Were they really watching the movie, or were they just having fun and your movie was part of that fun?
I think it was an experience of which the movie was only part, or it was, I would hope, the largest part. The drive-in phenomenon is pretty much ended in the United States, which was the only country where it was really important. For a variety of reasons, there are very few drive-ins left, so that audience is gone.
But it was once an important audience for you.
Yes, I would say in the 50s and 60s, the drive-in audience for us was probably 30 to 40% of the total audience.
Okay, well, with that audience in mind, I mean, how did that shape the movie?
Well, for instance, I did first film with Jack Nicholson called The Crybaby Killer, which was about a teenage boy who holds up in a drive-in, as a matter of fact, with hostages and is frightened as to what he's done. Today I probably wouldn't do such a film. If I did a film about a killer holding up someplace, he probably would be a little bit older.
I think I know why people enjoy laughing at a movie. I'm never sure that I've properly understood why people enjoy being frightened at a movie. Can you explain that?
I think the concept of being entertained by horror has been with us always. Beowulf was, I believe, was a long time ago since I studied English literature. It was the first long-form English narrative, which in part is a horror film. The monster Grendel is there. I think it goes back to our unconscious mind. What I try to do is to break through the barriers of the conscious mind and attack the fears, the fantasies of the unconscious. And I think the reason people enjoy this is these fears are in everybody. We give them the chance to relive the fear and they come out whole. They're alive at the end. They have conquered the fear. And any time you can conquer some fear or some problem within you, it's exciting while you're doing it, and it's a sense of triumph at the end.
That's if you're identifying in the movie, as I guess many people do, with the victim. I mean, and shrinking with terror when they shrink with terror. Do you think other people in the audience identify with the terrorizer and act out fantasies of aggression that in their ordinary lives they can't?
I think they probably do. I would hope the majority is not with the aggressor, but for that minority that is with the aggressor, they lose in the end. We teach them that crime or aggression does not pay, except in one film I did, A Creature from the Haunted Sea. I was so tired of always killing the monster. Creature from the Haunted Sea had to do with an underwater treasure and a number of people who were going after it. It was actually a comedy horror film. The last scene in the picture showed, and I wrote the whole film to lead up to this last scene, the monster is sitting on the treasure, picking his teeth at the bottom of the ocean, and the corpses and skeletons of all the people who were in the picture are scattered around him. That was the only time we had the monster win.
Did you ever want to do that again?
Actually, I'd like to do it again, but I figured one time, it's a long time ago, maybe I could try it once more.
Swamp Woman, She-Gods of Shark Reef, A Bucket of Blood. Are you wallowing in a genre in making movies like that, or are you perhaps sending it up just a little?
In those films, particularly Bucket of Blood, which was the precursor to Little Shop of Horrors, they were deliberately comedy horror films. Humor was the whole point of it. And the titles what we were trying to do is to push the titles so far that the audience would know that we were not serious.
How important is it that a film should make money?
It's quite important. I'm tempted to say vitally important. For me, it's extremely important because I have my own company and it's privately held. My company is not a publicly held company, so if I'm to continue in business and continue making films, my pictures must make money so that I can come back to make another one. If you're making a film for a large corporation, the need to make money is possibly a little bit less. And I envy, to a large extent, the European filmmakers who are able to work with government subsidies where the need to make money is not important at all. The government recognizes films as an art form and is willing to subsidize them, something the American government has never done.
But do you recognize film as an art form?
Yes, I think film is a corrupted art form. Therefore, I would say it is the art form of the 20th century.
Have any of your movies ever lost money?
Yes, I've lost a couple of times. I have an autobiography coming out sometime this fall, I think, and the publishers, for reasons best known to them, have given it the title, if I can remember it, How I Made 100 Films and Never Lost a Dime. And I pointed out to him, I've made over 200 films, and I've lost at least 10, 12 times out of that 200 I have lost money. Intruder,
which was in a picture that was important to you, didn't do well. Did that worry you at the time?
Yes, it bothered me a great deal. At that time, I had never made a film that had lost money. I've forgotten what number it was. It was 18 or 19 consecutive successful films. And The Intruder, well, it won a couple of awards at some minor film festivals and got wonderful reviews. It was the New York Herald Tribune. And this is still in my mind after all those years, said, this motion picture is an important credit to the entire American film industry. And it was the first film I ever made that lost money.
When you talked about film as an art, if a corrupted art, though, I was really wondering whether there was some aspect of filmmaking that you'd had to deny yourself as a producer or a director because of this need to make money. I mean, do you feel that your movies would have been different if that imperative hadn't been there?
Yes, my movies probably would have been different. The Intruder, which had to do with racial integration in the American South, was the type of film I wanted to do. When the picture lost money, and therefore I lost money, I pulled back. I tried to analyze what had taken place, and I felt that to a certain extent my message, as it were, had taken precedence over the entertainment value of the film. So I've tried to do a different type of film since then, a film, as I say, that on the surface will be an entertainment, and under the surface, if there is some message, it'll be a message that's meaningful to me, but only slightly accessible to the audience, so the audience need not feel they're being preached at.
Which of your films are you most proud of?
I've been asked that before, and I don't know. One day I'll say this picture, another day I'll say that picture, another day I'll say I don't like any of them. But for today, maybe The Intruder, maybe one of the Poe films, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death. In the 60s, I did some films based upon the kind of social upheaval of the time. The Trip and The Wild Angels come to mind. I don't know.
Which was the worst one?
The worst one. Probably a picture I made called Gas. It was a great idea. It was at the height of the Vietnam War, and a lieutenant, I've forgotten his name, had destroyed a Vietnam village. And when asked why, he said it became necessary to destroy the village in order to save it. So the title of my film was Gas, or How It Became Necessary to Destroy the World in Order to Save It. And it started out to be a wild comedy with some sort of a thought behind it. But I went into production without a finished script. And for all the filmmakers out there, I will say there is one rule, as far as I know, and that is make certain you have a finished script before you start shooting.
You grew up in Hollywood. Did you always want to direct movies?
No, my father had been an engineer, and I graduated from university with a degree in engineering. I worked 4 days for U.S. Electrical Motors and said, that's it, I can't come in Friday, and I left. And it may well be that having gone to school with the sons and daughters of people in the film industry and being close to it, my mind was starting to move in that direction. I then got a job at 20th Century Fox as a messenger and worked my way up to the story department, one thing another, and eventually wrote and made my own films.
But it's interesting that you're saying that. I mean, you're not saying that you ever saw a movie that made you think, I want to be a movie maker. You're saying that because you lived in a part of the world that made movies, you almost naturally gravitated into making movies. Is that right?
That's right, but I think also I was increasingly impressed by the films, the better films I was seeing. So I became intrigued, fascinated, possibly eventually obsessed by the film medium, and at the same time I was in the fortunate position of being at least part of it or on the periphery of it.
What have been the important influences in your early life? Were your parents important to you?
Yes, I would think my parents were important. My father was a successful engineer. My mother came from a rather strict Germanic background. Both her parents were born in Germany, and I think the combination of the kind of German Catholic background from my mother and a kind of free-thinking intellectual quest of my father may have shaped me in some way.
Did you read books as a child?
Yes, I read a great deal. Matter of fact, my mother occasionally would say, "You're reading too much, do something else."
Are you from a TV generation of children, or was there television in your home?
No, my generation was before television. So television didn't affect me at all. I see my children watching television, and I tell them they watch too much television and they should read books. And these kids are pretty savvy. They will say to me, "Television is to us what books were to you." And I'm trying to find a way to defeat that concept.
Did you go to the movies as a young boy, as a young man?
Yes, I went to the movies with my friends. The Saturday matinees were our general way of seeing films.
You mentioned earlier that you studied English briefly at Oxford. Does that still mean much to you or anything to you?
Yes, it was mostly the experience. I liked the idea of playing tennis in the lawn of St. Hilda's and having tea afterwards. I was at Oxford for just a short period of time. So I can't claim too much of an education there, but what I did learn gave me probably a greater recognition and feeling for the backgrounds of literature of today. At that time, their concept of English literature stopped somewhere in the 1920s. The feeling was that to discuss and study later work was premature, that the critical concepts of those films had not yet been formed.
In your movie-making career, and particularly as a producer, you have a quite extraordinary reputation for having spotted young talent and given a lot of that young talent, sometimes acting talent, Nicholson and De Niro, directing talent like Jonathan Demme and Martin Scorsese, and their first chance. What is it about a young director's work that catches your eye?
I look for several things in a young director.
When you gave those guys their chance, by the way, you had seen their work.
Not always. I had seen a student film from Francis Coppola. I had seen nothing from Peter Bogdanovich. I had seen nothing from Marty Scorsese. Jonathan Demme had worked for me as a producer and as a writer and had shot some second unit work, and based upon that. So sometimes I'll see the work of a director and sometimes I'll just say, "Okay, I think you can do it."
And they come cheap?
Comparatively so, yes.
What do you look for in a script? Somebody puts a script in front of you.
Generally, the ideas behind the script, the concept of the script is the most important thing to me. Then it's the way the ideas are expressed, the structure of the script. Finally, it will be the characters and the dialogue. I feel that we can always, if necessary, go for a rewrite, either with the writer, hopefully with the original writer, occasionally with the later writer, to work with the characterization and the dialogue.
Do you think most movies are visual enough? Are scripts written with enough of an eye to what people are actually going to see on the screen?
Yes, today they are very possibly overly so. If you look at the, quote, great films of 30, 40, 50 years ago, you'll find that very often they were not particularly visual. Films were still an outgrowth of the novel and of the stage. Today, there's a recognition, and has been for some time, that films are a visual medium. That recognition is carried sometimes to excess, so you're seeing nothing but flashy images on the screen.
You said that when you were looking at a script, you were looking for structure. Could you say a bit more than that? Are you actually looking for narrative, or are you looking for something that never lets up? What really matters?
It's partially a narrative structure, a plot, but to a large extent an emotional structure. A layout, as it were, of the script that will build to peaks and valleys, and hopefully the highest peak will be at the climax of the film. But when I say structure, I should also include with that the idea, the concept, the theme of the film, and the way in which the structure embodies that theme.
Why did you stop directing yourself?
I got tired. I had directed something like 50 pictures in about 15 years. One year I think I directed 6 films. And the last film I directed was Von Richthofen and Brown in Ireland. And every day I would drive from Dublin to the airport where we were shooting, and there would be a fork in the road, and it would say one way to this airport and the other way to Galway Bay. And every morning I was tempted to drive to Galway Bay and say, to hell with this, I've had enough. But I dutifully went to the airport and finished the film, and I knew that I would stop for a little while. My original plan was just to stop for 1 year, take a rest, the traditional sabbatical, and come back.
But you went on to produce instead.
Yes, during that year I started my company, New World Pictures, and became so involved with that that the year stretched on, and I never did get around to directing again until last year when I did Frankenstein Unbound.
As a producer, how much freedom do you allow a director?
I allow a director a great deal of freedom on the set. In the pre-production stages, however, I will work closely with the director so that he and I are in agreement on the theme of the picture, on the structure of the script, on the casting, on the way in which the picture will be made. Once we've agreed on those concepts, I will then leave the director almost totally free to interpret them on the set as he wishes.
When you're going through the script with the director in that way, are you suggesting a bit more action here, an opportunity for violence there, an opportunity for nudity in another scene? I mean, is that right? People say that.
Sometimes I will do that, not always. Occasionally, as with some of our wilder directors, I will be saying, let's pull this back a little bit. Maybe we're going too far here.
You have your conversation and he starts to shoot. Do you see rushes?
Yes. I make so many films now. I've been averaging about 20 films a year for the past 3 years, and we'll make about 20 again this year, that I can't see the rushes of all of the films all of the time. I will generally see the rushes of the first week of every film, and then occasionally, meanwhile, I'll have other people looking at the rushes for me.
If you don't see something you don't like, do you point this out to the director?
Yes, but I will not do it on the set. When I first started producing and working with other directors, I would go to the set to talk with the director, and I found that people would turn to me rather than the director, and I felt this was wrong. So if I go to the studio, I will talk to the director at lunch or while a shot is being set up, but I believe that I should not infringe on the director's authority while shooting.
Do you see a rough cut of the film or a fine cut? Or when do you see the film assembled?
We have developed, and I say we because I have what I believe is a very good staff working with me, we have a general procedure that we work with. The editor makes the first assemblage with the director's notes while shooting, so that within 3 or 4, at most 5 working days after the completion of the film, the editor shows that assemblage to the director only. Neither I nor my staff go to that. The director will then go through the picture one time himself and make his first director's cut, at which point several people in my staff will screen it with him, but I will not go to that screening. He will make his second and sometimes his third director's cut, and then I will come to the 3rd, 4th, 5th screening, and I will probably go to 2 or 3 screenings or cuts after that.
Do you ever have to ask for things to be done again?
Occasionally.
Because they're too strong or not strong enough?
Sometimes, if it's too strong, you can cut it out. If it's not strong enough, sometimes we will reshoot, but it's generally not for that. It's generally for areas that we simply feel have not worked out well. They've not really reached their fullest potential. But I'd say we reshoot on no more than 20 to 30% of our films. Most of our films are cut and finished according to the way they were shot during production.
What ratio do you allow a director?
That's an interesting question, because we do, and one that's I think has almost never been asked me before, because we do a lot of our work overseas. And when we work as we do in South America and sometimes in the Orient, the ratio of film becomes very important, because film with its various import duties in those countries is very expensive. And South American directors that we work with, such as Lucio Llosa in Peru and Hector Oliveira in Argentina, shoot at a much lower ratio than American directors. And the first time I sent an American director to Argentina, Hector and the crew were appalled at the amount of film he was rolling through the cameras. So we have said to our American directors, shoot at a lower ratio, and we've said to Hector and Lucio, feel free to run a little bit more film through than you normally do.
Okay, but what kind of ratio are we talking about?
Okay, we will generally say about 80 to 100,000 feet, which would be a ratio of around 10 to 1 would be what we'd be striving for.
That's fairly reasonable. Are you, the producer, responsible for the budget of the movie, or is the director responsible to you for sticking to budget?
I feel it's a joint responsibility, but the primary responsibility is the producer's. I will determine the budget with my production manager. Actually, I should restate that. I will just determine the budget. I will tell the production manager, work with the production manager as to how we're to make the best film within that budget. I will then say to the director, don't worry too much about the budget. You have this number of days. You have a certain schedule. You will have a certain amount of sets. We have this much to spend on the actors. Providing you stay within these areas, that's all you have to do to concern yourself with the budget.
Are producers more free in Hollywood than are directors?
It varies from film to film. Sometimes the director will be the most important person. Other times the producer will be the most important. Occasionally the star will be the most important. I would say this, however, the producer is more important in the Hollywood style of making films than he is in the European style.
Do you regard yourself as conducting a typical Hollywood operation, or do you see yourself in contradistinction to the big studios?
We are definitely in contradistinction or opposition to the operation of the major studios. We make our films for a fraction of the cost of major studios, and we work in a totally independent fashion.
What's wrong with the big studios?
Not as much as people think. Most of the big studios are profitable entities, which is why they are there. They make a reasonable number, I think, of good films. Their product, the Hollywood motion picture, is the most popular motion picture in the world by far. For instance, a big problem in the United States now is our adverse trade balance. Few people know that the second biggest dollar earner in the United States of all industries are motion pictures and television. Aircraft is first, motion pictures and television is second. The financiers of New York and the industrialists of Detroit and Pittsburgh would be shocked to recognize that, but it's true. So Hollywood is doing some things right. On the other hand, I think the preoccupation with a blockbuster, with a film that will earn $100 million, has driven out a lot of more interesting, smaller films, more experimental films that could be made. I think Hollywood has a tendency to play it safe now, to look for the big film, and there's a certain amount of waste also involved in the bureaucracy.
Are agents too powerful in Hollywood? Agencies?
A few agencies probably are too powerful. Matter of fact, I'll change that. I know for a fact at least 2 agencies wield too much power and have damaged certain films.
Do you want to name those?
I'd just as soon not.
You've given lots of opportunities to young talent, as we said, to beat the system, as it were, to give them a break. What is it about the system that denies that talent its chance?
I don't think the system denies that talent its chance indefinitely. I do think the good writers, the good directors, the good producers will emerge eventually and will show their talent and be recognized. It's just that the machine as such is so monolithic, it's hard to break in. So what I'm able to do is work with talented young people and give them a chance a little bit earlier.
What's the funniest thing that's happened to you in your movie-making life?
I've never been asked that question, and I'm not certain I have a ready answer. I've had some mildly amusing things, but this is a tough business, and I don't know if I've ever had anything wildly funny.
What frightens you?
I think what frightens me is not that dissimilar to what frightens other people. I think it is the childhood fears, the childhood fantasies bottled up somewhere in the back of my mind. When most people were young, We were afraid of stormy nights, of thunder and lightning, and possible monsters hiding underneath the bed. Our parents told us that this was nonsense. There was nothing to be afraid of. We knew very well there was a lot to be afraid of. And I think those things are still buried within me, as with others. With me also, there might be, and I don't know how much this would be shared with other people, there's probably a fear of lack of control, a fear of controls being taken away from me, a fear of being rendered helpless. Maybe part of my method of filmmaking is a way to conquer that, to be an independent filmmaker, both as a producer and a director, so that I have my own company and am not under the power of a major studio, and probably some of the themes of my films express that to a certain extent.
Who are the filmmakers you most admire?
Most of the filmmakers I admire are dead now. I like very much the work of the Russian director Eisenstein, of John Ford, of Hitchcock, of Howard Hawks, of the directors I admire today, or the filmmakers today. Probably people who make films very dissimilar from my films. Probably Fellini, Bergman. Of the directors closer to what I'm doing, probably George Lucas, Steven Spielberg.
You were talking about some of those great masters as people making dissimilar films to the ones that you're doing. Have you ever wanted to join them?
Somewhere in the back. Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No. Do you see yourself as one of them?
No, I don't. I think these people were giants. I think these were the great artists of the film. I think of myself more as a craftsman. Maybe there's some element of art will come into my work, but I try to make the best film I can under the circumstances in which I work. Some of those circumstances or difficulties might be self-imposed.
Make them quick, make them cheap, make them popular. Has that been a satisfying life for you?
Mildly satisfying. I don't think anybody has a life that is completely satisfying, but I'm moderately satisfied with my life.
How do you relax?
I relax to a certain extent with my family. I still read a great deal. I did play tennis until I hurt my elbow. I do a lot of swimming, a number of things.
What's left? What's the unrealized ambition?
Probably to make films that will be a little bit more satisfying to me. And I'm hoping that I will be able to do so in the future. My company is built to the point where it has a little bit more solidity now. We have more capital behind us. We are a richer company than when we started, so I can afford to experiment a little bit more than I have in the past.
In what way do you think movies will develop in a rapidly changing world with all sorts of different media upon us?
I think movies may diversify. I think there's been this emphasis upon the $50 million blockbuster. I think with the rise of video cassettes, with pay TV, with syndicated television, with free television in Europe, for instance, Europe has been the bastion of government television, there will be more avenues for the film to be exhibited, and as such, I think, or I would hope, there'll be more freedom for the filmmaker, so that you can make more interesting films on a limited budget, but have ways in which to exploit those films.
You said earlier you thought perhaps some young would-be movie makers might be out there watching you as we talk. If you had to give them one piece of advice as to how to get on in movies, what would that advice be?
It would probably be two pieces of advice. One would be to study films, either to go to a film school or to look at films and read the body of critical work that has grown up around them so that you have a knowledge of films. And second would be to get a job in the film or television industry in any way you can. It's nice to say I will be a director. I started as a messenger. If you have to start as a messenger, start as a messenger, but do something to get into the industry, because ability eventually will be recognized, and you can work your way up.